Hi, and welcome to another episode of Flipping Rich. So, Peter, have you ever heard the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease?
I gotta be honest, I've heard it, but I need it defined.
Okay, the squeaky wheel gets the grease is basically an American proverb or metaphor used to convey the idea that the most noticeable or loudest problems are the ones that are most likely to get the attention. So does that make sense to you?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
So, God, my question is, like in real estate, how does that hold true? Like, what do you think about being the loudest or putting the most attention to yourself to make sure you're getting heard, right?
Well, I think the closest I can come up with, it's kind of what we talked about being proactive, right?
Yep.
You know, it's like we talk about it all the time. In real estate, for a deal to happen, it's like 50 things need to happen. And one of the things that I've learned after decades in this business, that if you don't proactively do every one of those things, they won't happen. So I guess the parallel I could draw between the two, it's kind of the same thing you're saying, right? Like if you don't emphasize something, you were giving me an example before we got started, getting contracts back, right? Like you get a contract out to a seller, and let's face it, as important as it is to us, we think it's important to them. Like you're hoping it's important to them, but they got 20,000 things going on, right? So it's like you got to scream, you got to shout, you got to put yourself in the center of attention in their lives. And it's like that, throughout the whole business. You get an inspection done. We talk about it all the time. We talk to Mary, our closer. It's like, hey, Mary, is that inspection done? Is that inspection done? And then you're thinking, we're paying somebody money. Like we're ready to pay them money to do it. But guess what? We're not the only thing going on there. Contractor bid, right? How often are we sitting around waiting for contract bids to come in? Why? Because we're not the only ones going on, right?
Well, let's take these subjects one by one. Okay. So, contractor bid. We're talking about the squeaky wheel getting grease, right? And so that you're clear, inside of a wheel you've got a hub, and it's always going to run better, right? If it's got some grease in it. So that's the idea of putting some grease in the hub. So when dealing with a contractor, let's say, and you're waiting to get a bid back.
Okay.
Maybe they've given you a verbal bid, which happens a lot of times. They may give you a verbal number, but you're going to need an itemized bid, right? So you want to know parts, you want to know labor, material costs. What are some examples that these we should all use when working with a contractor?
Well, look, again, to go back to the whole premise of this whole thing, right? We work in a busy environment already, right? And the weird thing about it, this is the kind of stuff that you got to think about it. The better someone is, the busier they are.
Yep.
And the busier they are, chances are the less time they have.
Oh,
right?
and I know too, because my husband, runs a contracting company. We did for a long time. Now we kind of just do it for ourselves in our own houses. Is like for a contractor, just so you go to work all day, right? And it's a physically demanding job. So for a lot of people, when are they putting these bids together?
At night.
At night,
and they're 1 hour free that they have throughout the week, right?
And they're tired, probably dirty, probably ready for supper. The kids are around. So, I mean, that's why it's important to get with them, right? Not to be like a bother, but to let them know you need it, right?
There's no question. I mean, look, this is one thing I've learned, that if you don't prioritize yourself, nobody else is going to prioritize you, right? And well, again, if we're going to stick with the contractors, I mean, contractors just such an important part of the pie here, right? That piece of the pie is it could be argued as the most important piece. And I've seen this happen, by the way. I've seen this happen, especially when I got started in this business, where I got so messed up by contractors. The good ones, they were a little bit too busy. And you know what I did? I did what so many new investors do. You're like, oh, I don't want to bother them, right? I don't want to bother them. They got so many things going on. I don't want to push them. And man, it is totally opposite. If you don't bother them, if you don't push them, if you don't stay on top of it, you're going to be put in the back burner.
And life just gets in the way.
Well, it does. And one thing I've learned, and you and I both know this after doing the deals we do, if you're being put on the back burner, right, you're going to be screwed, right? If your contractor puts you on a back burner, if your closing attorney puts you on a back burner, if your money guy puts you on a back burner, right? If your title people put you on a back burner, anytime you're being put, if your sellers put you on a back burner, right? If your inspectors put you on a back burner, any piece, if you're being put on the back burner, the whole deal may collapse.
Well, and I definitely understand that, but let's talk about because you brought up something that I thought was very unique when we were talking about your lender. Mm-hmm. So let's not even talk about funding the deal. Let's talk about the act of you getting a loan from a lender. I mean, do you ever just like turn your application in and then that's it?
No, you don't just, and this is the crazy thing about it, because like in essence, you're giving them business, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they're giving you money, but you're giving them business that they
essentially work on commission.
And essentially, though, they don't close, they don't eat, right? Mm-hmm. But even in that regard, we're always talking about, hey, did you check the application? Is everything in? Here's the other thing that I found that why, if you're not screaming throughout, and I say screaming figuratively, but if you're not making noise throughout the deal, guess who really suffers? You're the one who suffers, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so let's say, again, to stick with what you were saying, stick with the money guy. If you don't have everything signed, sealed, and delivered in his office, mm-hmm. right? Because you got 20 other things going on, and these things are moving towards closing. That's what happens like 3 days before, and this has happened to me before. You're like, oh, okay, well, I submitted my application, so the money should be all good. And you're like calling Bob the lender, right? Mm-hmm. And Bob's like, oh, yeah, I got your application. Let me email you like what I need, right? You get this, and you've gotten this, right? Because, we're always raising money to this day. And it's like last week, remember, we're driving from Jacksonville, and, we're securing some more money for the deals we're doing. And you're just like, you remember that slew of things you got,
and
right?
I'm like, oh my gosh, all the stuff they need.
Well, and that's the thing. You got to prioritize yourself all the way through the deal. And really, this is how you develop a machine, right? Because if you're always playing catch up, here's the other thing I've learned. If you're playing catch up, you lose respect in this business. And then you lose contacts. Right? So that money person, that could be the right money person, could be the totally legit person, could be the person that's got all the money in the world, right? If you're not prioritizing yourself with them, right? Mm-hmm. Not only are you going to get messed up by probably not getting the deal funded in time, in a timely manner, you're going to lose the respect. And chances are next time you want to do a deal, they're going to be like, well, that deal never happened, right? And the deal before that never happened. And the reason it didn't happen is because you weren't screaming loud enough. And next thing you know, you're trying to get a deal funded with this, Bob the lender again. And he's like, you know what? This is not a good fit. So you're in essence, if you're not screaming the loudest, you're going to be left in the wind.
Yeah, I mean, and wouldn't you say that's kind of closely like, let's say you're doing your first deal or whether you've done your 20th deal?
Yep.
I mean, I think it's really important to set the pace. Mm-hmm. Right? To set expectations. I'm not talking about dealing with contractors, you got to be ugly, or dealing with, lenders, you got to be ugly. Actually, I'm saying the opposite. You don't want to be pushy in a negative way. Okay? You want to be inquisitive as if you really care about what they're doing, mm-hmm. and you're wanting to set this tone. The tonality in which you work matters so much. Mm-hmm. Right? Because then when you get to the next deal, what are they going to expect?
Well, they're going to expect promptness. They're going to expect courtesy. They're going to. Well, here's the other thing. You get to know people after a while, mm-hmm. right? So, I mean, going back to the, whether it's a contractor or whether it's the money person, the other thing that I've learned about, kind of, and you're right, you don't want to come out as a jerk. You don't want to do it in the wrong way. But that's how you set up systems, mm-hmm. right? Because after that money person, after I borrowed from somebody 30 times, mm-hmm. guess what? Our 31st, 41st, 51st, 101st deal, it's like clockwork. It actually gets easier with people mm-hmm. once you get everything set up and once you more or less prioritize yourself in their world.
Exactly. I mean? And I want to give you a little bit piece of advice in this scenario. Take the time to make it easy on others. Take the time to make it easier for others. Let me give you an instance. Like you're dealing with a hard money lender, right? Or a closing attorney or a title
yep.
company. Do you really think they want to receive 17 different emails with 17 different attachments with different subject lines on them? No. When a lender asks you for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, don't send them 5 different emails with 5 different attachments. What's the right way to do it, Peter? If you're dealing with a lender or if you're dealing with a title company, how does making it easier for them make it easier for you?
It's interesting. As you're asking this question, I'm thinking about it. You're right. We've been very focused about us being the loudest, about us kind of pushing things through and all this. But the reality is, you want to make it easy on that person, because as you think about this, we could bully our way through, right? We could just absolutely do like you said, right? Be disorganized, send 50 emails answering 3 different questions, not tying things in, through maybe subject lines and things like that, and literally bully our way through something, getting a deal funded, closing a deal, getting title work done. But you're right, man. If you make this like an awful experience for the person you're dealing with.
Yeah, I don't care how much money I'm making. If I hate the experience, who cares?
Yeah, if you make this a bad experience, so that you're right, there's a fine line. You got to be, I don't know if anyone's ever used this word about like real estate investing. You got to be classy about this whole thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got to be level up about this thing. You got to be absolutely, you got to have tact when you're doing this. Now, having said that, you do want to be classy. You do want to have tact. You do want to have all this stuff. But but going back to this initial premise, you absolutely have to prioritize yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, like being the squeaky wheel.
Yep.
Right? A squeaky wheel is not necessarily a bad thing if you know what it's for, if you can handle it properly, right?
No question.
But the squeaky wheel can literally mean being, somebody that's professional.
Yep.
Somebody that's got their stuff together. Yep. Somebody that's constantly coming back to their position, reminding them nicely about things.
Yep.
I think that's where the squeaky wheel, comes into order. Now we're talking about working with other professionals,
yep.
right? We sort of know how to work with lenders. We know how to work with title companies. We just discussed this.
Yep.
But regular homeowners are not necessarily as savvy as maybe like a lender, a bank, or an attorney. So on that side of things, being the squeaky wheel, how can we do that with tact and with bearing, with that understanding, without being pushy, without being ugly? I mean, I had an instance this weekend, where I was working with a seller.
Right.
And, he wasn't calling me. I was calling, hey, did you go see your father-in-law about the contract? Did you take the pictures that I asked you to? Did you do this? It was more of a conversation builder. So how do you feel it helps as an actual real estate investor? What are some tips to be that squeaky wheel when dealing with sellers?
Well, and I know you've seen me teach negotiations, and it really, the premise is the same. You're going to be a lot more effective when you can be in that seller's presence.
Yeah.
And it's funny how things line up in this business. Like you talk about negotiations, you're a better negotiator face to face. No one's going to argue that, all this, but then you start really expanding it. Well, why else do you want to be face to face? Why else, how do you work with a seller and make sure they're happy, that they're satisfied, but they are prompt at this whole thing? You get the closer you are in proximity to that seller when you're working the deal, negotiating the deal, getting the contract signed, the better off it's going to be. And it's going to be like a lot easier too, right? Like here's one thing I've learned. Like let's use extremes. Here's one extreme. You're talking to a seller and you've kind of negotiated a deal. They're not necessarily next to you. So you've done a lot of at least preliminary work over the phone. And you're like, okay, let me go ahead and email you the contract. Oh, Pete, I don't have a contract. I don't have an email. Okay. Let me fax. Oh, I don't have a fax.
You want me to go to Goodwill and get a fax machine and plug it up?
And let's say you go through all these and none of these are working, right? It's like, oh, no. It's like, I don't want your Goodwill fax because I don't even know how to hook it up, right? So I'm being extreme here. Let's say the extreme is you have to mail the contract in. I don't remember the last time we did it, but this is like snail mail. That is an extreme, out of sight, out of mind, and this is going to be very difficult to get that contract back.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's go to the other extreme. You talk to the seller, you set up a terrific appointment, you're at his house within an hour, you have a contract in hand, and you've negotiated the deal. How easy is it to get that contract back? A lot easier. So when it comes to sellers and the squeaky wheel, when it comes to sellers and getting things done, when it comes to sellers and prioritizing, when it comes to sellers and moving things forward, in my opinion, it's very simple. Do things with close proximity. The further you are away from that seller, and I know sometimes you have out-of-state sellers, you have non-owner-occupied houses. I get it. Sometimes it doesn't work. But at all costs, whenever possible, in order to do what we're talking about here today, get things done, be in that person's space.
So are you saying, like, when I'm first getting started, I'm first getting contracts back, the closer I am to the seller, meaning like physically, like person-wise, geographically, the better off I'm going to be?
There's no question.
And why is that really? Because I want to make sure all of you guys get the idea here. Why is it important to be near your deals to begin with?
Well, look, the big picture is it makes you a better negotiator. It gives you the ability to build a better relationship. But when we're talking specifically what we're talking about, right? I mean, let's face it, what we're talking about right now is prioritizing. I don't care if you're talking about a contractor or a closing attorney. It's all about prioritizing what we're doing as opposed to 50,000 other things. So the reason that is important with the seller, same thing, priority, right? I hate to say it, we're not always going to be a priority. I mean, every once in a while you get this motivated seller that's calling you and you not calling them. That happens rarely, right? That happens rarely. And so it's a matter of prioritizing. Well, guess what most of the time, unless you have something happen unexpectedly, most of the time the things we're involved in right now is our priority. Like right now we're recording this podcast. That is our priority. Our priority is not going on a beach right now. Our priority is not, maybe even closing a real estate. Our priority now is this because we're doing this, right? Well, when you're with somebody in front of them in their space, geographically linked, you automatically become a priority. And when you become a priority, you can hold that person's attention, and pretty good chances are you're going to be able to get way more things done than if you're 5,000 miles apart.
So would you say the best chances to get a contract signed and get it back is in person?
There's no question. There's absolutely no question. Now, I will tell you, I could extend this to every other piece we just talked about. You need that contractor bid, right? Of course, and by the way, I did this a lot, especially when I got started. Once I finally identified one or two key contractors, I was smart enough to realize, because I went through so many bad contractors, I was also smart enough to realize when I found a couple good ones that it's hard to keep them, right? It's a lot harder to keep them.
Because if you don't keep getting them jobs, then they're going to go on to somebody else.
There's no, and even if you do keep them job, because they're so good, they're always going to be, wanted. So, and especially in this initial, getting bid stuff. So I would physically go to where they worked out of, right? I would physically drive to their office, because if I knew if I was sitting there, right? If I was sitting there, then all of a sudden my bid became the priority, right?
Yeah.
When I was raising capital, right? I tell this story all the time. My biggest capital raise at the private level, right, was a $10 million day I had, where I literally raised in one day from multiple guys $10 million, right? Again, why? I was a priority because I met with them face to face.
Oh, so you went there to talk to them
Literally,
about
I went to a country club from a friend of mine. He literally marched about 20 of his buddies, right? But because I was literally a priority at that moment, they not only heard my pitch about raising capital and understood what I was doing, they made commitments. So as I look back at this, Julie, pretty much all facets of this business, right? Yes, it's okay to do it by phone. And let's face it, in today's world, we live in the technology, information age, 24/7 and all this, right? But I try to use this as much as possible to nothing else, get in the door. Get in the door, build relationships. I mean, let's face it, I got a lake house 20 minutes from here. Part of the reason I have the lake house, so then when our partners or our team members, right, they're in town, they're staying at the lake house, right?
Or if I want to go swimming.
Or you want to go swimming, right? But this is where we build our relationships, right? This is where we can get face to face in front of people. So there's no question. Being squeaky wheel, very important. Being a priority in someone's life that is, helping you put real estate deals, very important. You got to be proactive all the way through the process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think that wraps up today's episode of Flippin' Rich. And we hope you understand that the squeaky wheel always gets greased.